Mormon Stories is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies solely upon the support of people like you, its listeners. To help keep the podcast alive or to become a member of the community, please become a monthly subscriber by visiting mormonstories.org and clicking on the donate button on the right side of the page under support. All contributions to Mormon Stories are completely tax deductible and go towards producing the podcast and building communities and programs of support for Mormons like you. Thanks for your support. Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. Today I'm very excited to have a special guest with us on Mormon Stories. His name is Dr. Mark Juergensmeyer. To read his bio, he is the director of the Orphalia Center for Global and International Studies and a professor of sociology and global studies and affiliate professor of religious studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He is a pioneer in the field of global studies and writes on global religion, religious violence, conflict resolution, and South Asian religion and politics. He has published more than 300 articles and 20 books, including the recent Global Rebellion, Religious Challenges to the Secular State. And the reason why we're interviewing him is because today in my Facebook feed, an article came up from the good people at Free BYU. And the article basically says prominent scholar, which Dr. Juergensmeyer certainly is, boycotts BYU Law's annual Religious Freedom Conference in protest over BYU's religious discrimination. So, Dr. Juergensmeyer, welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for making time for us. So real quick, let's just start with your background. I was reading through your background and it's really, really impressive, but just tell us a bit about who you are and kind of where you come from and what led to your kind of work in religious studies.
Well, I'm a sociologist of religion, but the global religion. So I work on issues of religion and politics around the world, and I'm particularly interested in the rise of religious nationalism, religious violence in an era of globalization. I have a religious past myself. I was trained in seminary. I'm a member of a Christian church, and so I don't have anything against religion.
Sure.
In some ways, I'm a religious groupie. I admire religious traditions around the world, and all people of faith to me are special and deserve respect and deserve the rights that everyone has, particularly in terms of freedom of religion. So I was particularly keen to take part in this conference, part of a center that is devoted to issues of religious freedom. Very concerned about that. It's one of the hallmarks of what they do, and so I was glad to take part, and particularly with colleagues who were at BYU that I admire and appreciate and respect, and with other colleagues who were going to be at the conference. And I had been invited last year, and then it just didn't work out because of my schedule. And even this year, was in New York last weekend. I have to be in New York again this weekend. I have to teach on Monday and Wednesday, so I could only be there one day. And we worked it out, and I feel very apologetic to the organizers that my withdrawing, I'm sure, created some difficulty in canceling airplane reservations and hotel reservations, and I'm apologetic for that. I feel badly that that's the case. But in good conscience, when I found out about this policy of expelling any Mormon student, for questioning their faith or converting to another religious tradition, this seemed such a violation of religious freedom that in conscience I simply couldn't take part in a conference that was sponsored by an institution that would have such a policy.
Have you bumped into Mormons over the years just in your sort of scholarly or day-to-day interactions?
Sure. You know the old cliche, some of my best friends are Mormons.
Talk a little bit about your interactions with Mormonism prior to this.
I've had Mormon students and friends with them, not just students. I admire them as persons, and I admire their commitment to the faith. I've had a couple students who've been on mission, and one of them came back even more fervent in his faith. And in my class on global religion, where I invite our local Mormon missionaries to come to class, and we talk with them, and it was a wonderful interaction with them. On one case, the student who had been a former missionary himself then joined the discussion and talked about his own experiences going on mission and what how meaningful it was to him. Another student who had been on mission came back and had the opposite experience, and he decided that he really couldn't, in good faith, be part of the church and hold the beliefs that he no longer believed. And I supported him in his decision. Religion is such a intimately personal thing, and belief is just that. It's belief. It's whatever kind of structure in the imagination one holds to give meaning and dignity to life. So I have no quarrel with the idea of it, but I also understand and appreciate that people would challenge the received belief, the really received faith that they've gotten. And my mind, no faith is really worth it without being challenged until one makes it one's own. One makes that one's understanding of the central realities of life and of faith in a way that resonates with the truth of one's own experience. So I believe in religious freedom for that reason. It's sad to me to see religious freedom restricted, particularly at an institution of higher education that should be devoted. All institutions of higher education should be devoted to free inquiry and the challenges to the mind and the ability of students to reconsider themselves in the light of these challenges. That's what a university is all about.
Sure. So it sounds like you've had positive interactions with Mormons over the years.
Sure.
And as you sort of think about the LDS Church in general, it sounds like you have pretty favorable opinions about the church. True?
Sure. All religious traditions. I think that you can say, oh, well, that's not really true. Well, what's really truth? I mean, all belief, as I say, just is belief, and I don't mean to say just belief. I almost said that, but I didn't mean that in the sense that it's a meaningful structure of reality that people have enter into with the sense that it resonates with what is deep and true to themselves, and it comes in varied forms. Just like language or art or music comes in various forms, and I appreciate all of them.
Now, some people, when I posted your article, one of the most common responses is, look, BYU is a private university. It's a private religious university. Mm-hmm. Everyone who signs up to go there signs an honor code that basically commits that if they're believing LDS, that they'll attend church and maintain their faith. And so in some sense, people say two things, that anyone who loses their faith kind of knew the deal when they signed up for it, and a private religious institution has the right to do whatever they're going to do. How would you respond to those two arguments in response to your position today?
Well, it's a university. It's not a Sunday school. It's not a seminary. It's not an adjunct of the church in the sense that it's created for solely spiritual and doctrinal reasons. If a university is a university, it's a university. And so universities are by nature and institutions that are open to free inquiry and encourage it and allow and encourage people to deal with the consequences of free inquiry in terms of their own personal lives. And I know there have been legal issues and legal rulings that have affirmed the university's position that makes no difference to me. I mean, discrimination, whether it's legally ruled as permissible, is still discrimination, and I think it has no room in the university. I'm a firm believer in the freedom of speech and free inquiry, and I love the church, but I also love the university, and I as someone who's worked in the university for all of my adult life, over 40 years, it's an institution that I cherish, and it's so important for society. Society, particularly in the era of the kind of internet and the ubiquity of media that seems to challenge freedom of speech by the most strident and narrow of messages on all sides, it's so important for the university to be a bastion of free speech, to allow for free inquiry. And to see that challenged or sullied in any way is disturbing to me as somebody who feels strongly about the commitment of the university, of the academic community, to free inquiry.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like you had agreed to attend. Had you agreed to speak at this event particularly?
Yes,
okay.
I was on a panel. Mm-hmm.
That must have been super hard to kind of make this decision so close after those commitments had been made. Oftentimes when I talk,
I feel very badly for the organizers, as I said.
Yeah.
I mean, no disrespect to them, and I'm terribly apologetic. If I had known about this policy earlier, I would have obviously made this decision long ago. But as soon as I received the news about it, of course, I thought about it. I did some investigation to make sure that what they said was in fact accurate. That the church, the BYU, in fact, had this policy, and so I took a couple of hours to do this. But then clearly, I knew I had to make the decision not to attend.
Sometimes, so the LDS Church makes various sort of scientific truth claims, about the ancient America, or about this piece of scripture called the Book of Abraham. And oftentimes people who are struggling in their faith try and go to those professors and say, hey, will you comment, non-Mormon professor, will you comment on the archaeology of Latin America, or will you comment on, Egyptian, interpretations of a particular text? And oftentimes professors are really hesitant to want to go on the record in any way that would challenge a religion or make a church look bad. They'd rather just sort of stay silent. And so I'm just wondering, what is it about your background or your perspectives that said, you know what, I may catch some heat for this, but I'm willing to speak out, even if there might be some risks. I don't know if there'll be any risks, but I mean, a lot of professors seem to worry that somehow their ability to get articles published, or their reputation, or their ability to get a grant or whatever, could be negatively influenced by speaking out against a particular institution, especially one with power.
Yeah, well, fortunately, at this point in my career, there's nothing I want or could possibly try to achieve that I haven't already gotten or achieved. So for me, that's not an issue. But
can you sympathize with those concerns? Or
well, yes, but I mean, the example I think you gave is a little bit different. I think it's one thing for a professor to be very sensitive to a religious belief, and if a student came to me and said, I was taught in the Catholic Church that the virgin birth, and also that the water and wine at the time of communion turns into the real body and blood of Jesus. What do you think? Well, I mean, I could tell them as an individual what I think, but as somebody who is a professor of religion, I would like to present a whole range of religious beliefs and religious doctrine and dogma, but to get into a scientific investigation of it may not be appropriate for a professor of religious studies, for example. If I were in a different kind of class, in a biology class, for example, maybe that would be more appropriate for a professor to comment on that. So I can understand their reluctance simply in their role, because one plays different roles in different disciplines within academia, and one should speak to the kind of knowledge that one is trying to impart, and the kind of inquiry and analytic judgment that one is trying to bring to a particular subject. But the issue of expelling students because they switch is not a matter of questioning their dogma. I mean, it's really a matter of freedom of belief, and to me, that's really quite shocking that a student would be expelled from an academic institution. They could be expelled from a church. I can understand that. I have no quarrels with that. Churches should be able to expel people for whatever reasons they want to expel people. That's their business, but not from a university, because the university is different. The university is a social institution in our society that's dedicated to free inquiry and clear critical thinking, and it should let the chips fall where they may. And so I feel very strongly about that.
You mentioned in your letter particularly being concerned that non-Mormons can convert to Mormonism while at BYU, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But Mormons can't convert away.
Right. And I'm sure that if in some other country, if there was a Muslim country, for example, in a university in Saudi Arabia or in Pakistan, and a student converted to a Muslim student converted to the Mormon faith, and then was kicked out of the university, I'm sure that administrators at the BYU would be disturbed and would regard this as an affront to religious freedom, and they'd be right. But how could they be so blind not to see that their own policies are doing exactly the same thing?
Something that I feel is that Google and the internet has really changed, organized religion in the Western world, in the sense that
which changed all of our lives in a very profound way.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of Mormons and a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses and a lot of Scientologists and others who were raised with a certain narrative of our church's history that was maybe whitewashed so that people would want to believe and be loyal to the church, and then when they discover this information, they start to doubt and question. But oftentimes these doubts and questions are like a virus. They're contagious and they spread. My guess is what the church doesn't want is students doubting and questioning at the university, because then it spreads to other students and all of a sudden you have an outbreak, you have an epidemic. Can you empathize with the church's concern that these doubts and questions, are undermining Christian religions all throughout the Western world, that they don't want sort of that wildfire of doubt and disbelief spreading at their sort of own, religious university?
Well, I can understand this as a parental concern, but that doesn't say much about their conviction of the truth of their own belief, does it? I mean, if they say if it's put into the kind of the marketplace of free expression, then suddenly people will be challenged and want to change. That's rather it would be disturbing if that were the case. You may very well be right, but that's the risk you take when you have a university. If you don't want people to go to university, if you want to contain them within some sort of religious school that is not accredited, that's not a part of the academic community that's devoted to the free inquiry and free expression of beliefs, that's your business. You could have that kind of insular society. But if you're going to create a university, then you're going to open yourself up for the free inquiry and the consequences of that inquiry. There's just no way around it.
Sort of my last kind of questions. I know you got to go soon. In 2015, we've seen the Pew Foundation release this report, The Rise of the Nuns. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Sure.
So over a fifth of the United States now no longer affiliates with. Oh, go ahead.
And you're talking about the NONE.
That's right.
Not the ones on the bus.
That's right. Not the ones with the habits. Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so over 20% of the United States no longer affiliates with the religious tradition, and over 1/3 of millennials are no longer affiliating with any religious tradition. I've studied post-Mormons and former Mormons, and well over half of those who leave the LDS Church end up becoming agnostic or atheist. For many of us who are struggling to sort of maintain any religious belief, not just in Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon, but in God or Jesus or any faith, what would you say to someone who's in that position? You could say, hang on. You could say, try a different church. You could say, God bless you as a secular person. What counsel or advice would you give a struggling, formerly religious person who's trying to figure out where to go in their life?
Oh, I think it's good that people struggle with ideas of faith, with identity, with their kind of location within the cosmos. This is a sign of maturation and of growing. I don't have any problems with that. And one of the things that interests me about the phenomenon,
what if they doubt God or Jesus?
Well, but one of the interesting things about the nuns, as you put it. Now, as I understand it, this is a list of options you can choose. Are you practicing this, that? Are you atheist? Are you agnostic? That's also on the list. And then there's none. And these are people who choose none. Not atheist, they're not agnostic, but they're also not a member of some institutional religion. And when you talk to them, and I have a graduate student doing work on the religion of the nuns on exactly this issue. When you talk with them, you'll find them commonly say, well, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. And what does that mean? Well, I think in many cases it means that they do have a sense of religiosity. They do have a sense of spiritual depth. They do have a sense about the wonder of the universe. They do have a sense of a connection between something greater than they are. They do have a sense that the world is profound and interesting and not a capricious or random place, that there is a meaning to it. And all of these are essential religious sentiments. So I think in a funny kind of way, and maybe this has to do with an era of globalization and multiculturalism, where we're all kind of pushed and shoved next to people of other traditions, and we realize suddenly, hey, that we can't all be right, or we can't all be right in a very narrow way. There must be something profoundly similar about all of these things. So I'm really quite optimistic. I find this a very positive direction. I think there is a sense in which we are beginning to share as common people on this planet a common spirituality and a common religiosity and a common moral commitment to be responsible citizens on planet Earth, and are free from any kind of institutional constraints in order to express it. At the same time, I continue to be a committed member of a particular church, and the Episcopal Church, and I'm a faithful member of the church, and I go through all the rituals and I say the creeds. And well, how can you, if you believe what you say about a kind of common religiosity, how can you say that you believe in the resurrection and the virgin birth? And I said, well, I take this all as a kind of symbolic expression of something that's meaningful and rich in life. I'm not trying to say that this is going to stand up against scientific scrutiny. That's not the point. The point is to speak in the kind of metaphorical and beautiful and artistic language that religion gives us about what is meaningful in the world. And if you don't find that metaphorical and artistic language meaningful or working for you, from my point of view, that's fine. Find whatever expresses the kind of richness and depth in life in your own terms. So I feel good about the way in which we are moving as a community on this planet, and I don't fear the kind of challenges to traditional faith.
There is a certain subgroup of Mormons that are trying to encourage this sort of non-literal, symbolic, metaphorical participation. And right now, as at least partly evidenced by my own excommunication, it seems as though the church isn't really happy or supportive of that type of approach. And so I think there's a lot of people.
Sure, there's struggles within every religious tradition over exactly the kind of literalism versus the more, kind of more metaphorical understanding of religious symbols and language. Happens in every religious tradition. I went to seminary. But the seminary I went to was Union Seminary in New York City, which was founded by a group of faculty who had been kicked out of the Presbyterian Church. This is the end of the 19th century. They were biblical scholars who had been kicked out of the Presbyterian Church because they dared to suggest that the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Pentateuch, were not all written by Moses. That was the kind of the church's belief. And they pointed out that within the first 5 books, the books talk about Moses' own death. So it's quite unlikely it would have been written by Moses. But that wasn't enough for the church, and they kicked him out. And so this has been a tension within all religious traditions. And our seminary, very proudly, was devoted to free inquiry of religious expression, and in addition to the training of the ministry. And it felt that the training of the ministry, for the training of the ministry, free expression of religious ideas and inquiry was absolutely essential. It made the faith stronger. So I think that's unfortunate that the leaders of the church don't recognize this really profound insight that only when faith is tested does it become solid in a way that really will make the church stronger. And so this inquiry really, I think, should not be something to be feared, but something to be welcomed and appreciated for the continuing strength of the church.
And yet, isn't Christianity sort of in decline outside of Catholicism, sort of in the Western world, because of these doubts and questions?
Well, sure, but I think throughout the world there are challenges to the narrowness of belief because of multiculturalism and because of the global era in which we live. But as I say, I think this is being supplanted with a kind of the religion of nuns, the kind of specific spirituality. But as that happens, I think it's also understandable that the fear of the traditional, defenders of the faith, whether they're Muslim or Buddhist, and I just came back from Myanmar with the Buddhist monks are just incensed that of the changes in Myanmar and feel like the small little Muslim community is challenging them, and so they're trying to create a strident new defense of Buddhism. So these defenders of traditional religion exist in every religious tradition, particularly in the era of globalization, where we feel such challenges. And as on the one hand, society becomes more liberal, more accepting of the diversity of faith and the diversity of symbolic expression of faith and the kind of unity of belief that is beyond this kind of dogmatic specificity. It's understandable that the defenders of the old traditions would become even more hard and even more fearful of the changes that are coming about. But I think that's a pity, because I think, in fact, it will make faith stronger rather than weaker in the future.
So for those doubting or struggling or leaving Mormonism, do you take the step to encourage them to retain some type of faith or spirituality? Do you think that's important?
I think they should find what's important for themselves. I don't think anybody can tell you what to believe or how to believe. And I certainly don't think it's the role of professors to provide that kind of guidance. I think our role is simply to encourage people to be open, critical thinkers, and to but be open to the value of religious traditions. I certainly don't, when I teach global religions and I teach about religious traditions, I do very respectfully. And students will come up to me and say, when you gave that lecture on Islam, I thought you were a Muslim, but now you're talking about Buddhism, and now I think you're a Buddhist. And I go, that's great, because I want you to understand how these religious traditions, even though beliefs may seem wacky from an outsider, but how meaningful they are to people within the tradition. So I'm very respectful of the Mormon tradition, and very, I think we should cherish the way in which those beliefs in that community has been such a rock and been so meaningful to so many different people. But if you're within it and it doesn't feel right for you, then I admire your questioning. I admire your kind of thinking about yourself and your relationship to the tradition of which you've been a part. It's all good, and so we need to encourage open inquiry, but at the same time recognize the value of faith traditions and the kind of vitality they've given life.
Well, Dr. Mark Juergensmeyer, I just want you to know, as a cultural Mormon, I've observed that the LDS Church pays most attention to sort of external critics and media. And so as someone who wants to see the church move in the right direction, as someone who's a graduate of BYU and cares about that institution, I just want you to know I believe that you speaking openly is going to have a very positive impact in the long run. And as a cultural Mormon, I just want to thank you for your courage and willingness to speak out, because it actually makes a big difference to the people, to my people. And I just want to thank you on behalf of them.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to show my support for you, for the Mormon faith, and for the freedom of inquiry.
All right. The website is juergensmeyer.org. I won't bother to spell it here, but you can find it on mormonstories.org. Again, Dr. Juergensmeyer, thank you so much for coming on Mormon Stories. Take care.
Well, thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us make more like it by becoming a monthly subscriber at mormonstories.org. Music for this episode was provided by The Lower Lights.
When other sources cease to make me whole, when with a wounded heart, anger or malice, I draw myself